My name is Panchramlai Monica Lee, and I serve as WIOPI's current Director of Strategic Partnerships and Outreach, where I oversee our regional network and our community engagement efforts. We're so thrilled to have you all join us today for what will be an incredible program ahead. I'm personally so excited for this breakout because it features a lot of amazing people that I admire. And I really just want to thank all of our esteemed speakers and guests here who took the time to travel near and far to join us today. So if you are here in the audience, you are in the storytelling, advancing equity through storytelling and narrative change breakout session. So if this isn't the session you signed up for, welcome anyway. We're super excited to have you. So just some housekeeping items before we begin. Bathrooms are located down the hall to your right past the staircase. Lunch will be located in the Student Center Great Hall where you all checked in for registration, and it will immediately follow the breakout session from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And today's section will actually end 10 minutes earlier due to reasons outside of our control, but you'll still get to do a short live Q&A with our panelists, and it just means you'll get to lunch first. So thank you all for being patient. And finally, as you can see, we do have a camera in the back, so we are recording today's session, which will be posted to WIOPI's YouTube page after the forum today. So now, I'd like to start our session by introducing our first speaker to provide some welcome remarks from Shelley C. Lowe, Chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Chair Shelley Lowe is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Ganado, Arizona. From 2015 to 2022, she served as a member of the National Council on the Humanities, the 26-member advisory body to NEH, an appointment she received from President Obama. Chair Lowe's career in higher education has included roles as Executive Director of the Harvard University Native American Program, Assistant Dean in the Yale College Dean's Office, and Director of the Native American Cultural Center at Yale University. Prior to these positions, she spent 6 years as the Graduate Education Program Facilitator for the American Indian Studies Program at the University of Arizona. Chair Lowe has served in a variety of leadership roles nationally, most recently as a member of the University of Arizona Alumni Association Governing Board and of the Challenge Leadership Group for the MIT Solve Indigenous Communities Fellowship. She has served on the board of the National Indian Education Association and as a trustee on the board for the National Museum of the American Indian. If anyone knows anything about storytelling and narrative change, it would be Chair Lowe, and we are so grateful to have her kick off today's session. Please help me welcome National Endowment for the Humanities Chair Shelley Lowe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning. How's everybody today? It's a beautiful day today, and I'm sure it's going to get nicer. We're going to stay inside, though, and have some nice conversations, so that's okay. Yat Shelley Lowe Yanishia, Belagana Lishle, Nanestage Touching Bashichi, Belagana Dashache, do Tramaha Dashanale, Locantia de Nasha, do Washington de Shigan. My name is Shelley Lowe, and I am Navajo. I'm originally from Ganado, Arizona. I am chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and I live and work here in Washington, D.C. And I am just so delighted to be with everyone here this morning. I do want to give a special hello, good morning, good evening to my Pacifica Indigenous relatives. Aloha, hafade, talofa. It's just so great to celebrate the history and contributions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders to our communities and to the country. And reflecting on today's theme, I believe that being visible together starts with telling stories. Many stories, stories of triumph, stories of pain, of hardship, and of love. It's only when we exchange those stories that we see each other not as one race or another, but as people standing together for a better world. Years ago, I was an undergraduate student at the University of Arizona, and I failed calculus as a math major, which was so shocking. But I started taking American Indian Studies classes and sociology classes, and suddenly everything for me shifted. Worlds opened up to me, worlds of language, of artistry, of meaning-making, of trying to understand the humanities and the rich stories they tell. Although I did not know that at the time that I was doing humanities, they were setting me down on paths I didn't know existed and paths that I still travel today. In the campus bookstore while shopping for my class textbooks, remember when we used to do that? I would often see a book titled The Warrior Woman by Maxine Hong Kingston. And I was constantly drawn to this, right? And it was the title, Warrior Woman, right? But I was never able to read it during college. I finally read the book during COVID, after I found it in a free little library in my neighborhood. And I was mesmerized by the weaving of a tale that was both past and present. And 2 nights ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Maxine and hearing her speak to the importance of authors like Thoreau and Emerson and how they inspired her own writing. And I took the opportunity to shake her hand and to tell her how much both her words and her book helped me better understand. And I share this with you because I think it takes a story to build a bridge. We all have stories of pain, of joy, of struggle. It's what we make of that story that determines the course of our lives, that shows us a path forward, that shows us how to live. And to me, the humanities are those stories. They are what we share around the dinner table. They are the characters in films that grip us. They are the lines in a novel that make us feel seen, as if sometimes for the first time. Joy Harjo, who's a friend of mine, I love her. She's Muskogee Creek and the former U.S. Poet Laureate. She writes in her poem, The Creation Story, about finding the words to remember the dead, the words to keep us safe. Her final stanzas are a call to act. This house, in danger of being torn apart by stones of fear. If these words can do anything, if these songs can do anything, I say bless this house with stars, transfix us with love. Our nation is in danger of being similarly torn apart. But the way forward, as Joy Harjo puts it so elegantly here, is paved with our words, our songs, and our love. That's where the humanities come in. They can help us in times of division because they remind us of what we all love, of what we all share. The humanities are a bridge. They are a blessing. The Chinese-American novelist and recent National Humanities Medalist, Amy Tan, said in an interview in 2017, "We need to have stories that are so deeply personal, so real, that even though they're fictional, people are engaged in them to a point where they are the characters. That is what changes people." And that is true. Stories can lift us up, can lift our neighbors up. They can make real what was only fiction. And I hope today is an opportunity for you all to hear and tell new stories, stories that make us visible together. And now, I'd like to introduce Don Young, who will be kicking off this morning's panel discussion. Don is the Director of Programs at the Center for Asian American Media. He has supervised 150 award-winning national broadcasts and worked on the NEH-funded PBS documentary, Asian Americans. Don, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those lovely opening remarks. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. This is a really exciting conversation. I think this is what we're all craving to have, right? How do we tell stories with one another? And so I'll read the panel conversation or the description, but then also with the backdrop of, like, you know, there are a few folks in the room who I haven't seen since before the pandemic started, but just try to reset your mind in regards to where we are now, what's pressing ahead, but where were we before this pandemic and the world shifted, and what can we, you know, I always try to encourage stepping back and trying to think through what is the story that you want to tell if you can control the narrative, right? And I think for today, you know, when I was invited to today, it's a real privilege to be here today with everybody. I think I'm really inspired with all the work that everybody does. The hour's not going to be enough time, but I'll try to get out of the way now and just really have you all share what's very special about what you stand for. But so today's panel is Advancing Equity Through Storytelling and Narrative Change. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impacted Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities and exacerbated longstanding inequities. Yet the past 3 years also showcase the incredible strength and resiliency of our communities. Storytelling has long been a powerful tool for advocacy, building solidarity within our communities and across movements, and humanizing our lived experiences. So I will introduce everybody, and if you could raise your hand, I mean, there's name tags here. But, I've done a lot of research, and we all will have a great time today. So to my left, Kiki Rivera, storyteller from EPIC, the amazing empowering Pacific Islander communities. Mei Liang, writer, performer, educator, and co-founder of Funny Asian Women Collective? Yeah.
AKA FOC.
I've been waiting like a week for her to say that. So we're going to get some energy now. Rinku Sen, Executive Director of Narrative Initiative. And, I'm excited to meet everybody today, but Rinku has been, I think for a lot of us, a real somebody who's constructs the models for us to tell narratives, right? So I'm really happy to be here today, but this is our first time meeting, right? So, and then a dear friend, Naomi Tukoyan Underwood, Executive Director of Asian American Journalists Association. So why don't we get started? Yeah, I mean, this is such an exceptional group. I'll try to get it out of the way as best I can, but let's just start with introductions. Please share a little bit about yourselves and how the mission vision of your organization reflects the narrative work you care about. So why don't we start first with Naomi?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Naomi. Can everyone hear me? Yes. I'm Naomi Tukuyan Underwood, Executive Director of AJA, as Don said. And I'm here as a Filipina immigrant who grew up on the Pacific Island territory of Guam. That has informed, I think, everything in career and life. And do I go into AJ's mission now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think talk a little bit about.
Yes, and I came to AJA from Capitol Hill campaigns and civic engagement, and brought that to AJA because I truly believe in AJA's mission in terms of increasing the diversity of newsrooms, especially increasing the ranks of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in order to ensure that AAPI stories are told, and also ensuring that across newsrooms, AAPI narratives and communities are represented equitably and accurately in coverage. Because journalism is the first draft of history, and the reason why narrative change needs to happen is because in the past, media has gotten those first drafts wrong about us. Yep.
Hi, I'm Rinku Sen. Really excited to be here and see all of you. It's exciting that so many people want to dig into narrative and storytelling as part of our work with Asian American communities. So, my organization, Narrative Initiative, our mission is to work with social movement leaders, so leaders in the labor movement, in economic justice, in immigration, in API communities, to help those leaders develop the narrative power pillar of their strategy. So you need political power, you need economic power, you also need narrative power. When I was young, a million years ago, and starting to learn organizing, my mentor said to me that to win, you have to have organized people, organized money, and organized ideas. And our work is about helping folks who are already moving the people and the money also think about how they're going to move ideas and values through collections of stories. And one of the reasons I do that is because I'm interested in narrative that comes out of mass movements and out of community organizing, out of people like gathering and figuring out how to solve problems. So that's us.
My name is Mei Liang. Again, I identify as Hmong American, former refugee, was actually born in a refugee camp in Thailand, only 9 months. People feel really bad in them. I was only there for 9 months. Also from St. Paul, Minneapolis, so I represent the Midwest, represent Southeast Asians, first generation, everything in my family. I'm a playwright, poet, performance artist, educator. Also here with an organization called Funny Asian Women Collective, FOC, which I co-founded. The other 2 co-founders are in the back as well. They're here as my entourage. Anyway, but our mission, we started in 2014, and our mission is to use comedy to combat the dehumanization and invisibility of Asian women, right? So it sounds really like, it sounds really serious. But at the end of the day, we wanna honor and create a space where Asian women could tell their stories uncensored. And a really quick example for is that one of my plays was called The Korean Drama Addict's Guide to Losing Your Virginity, right? Title. Because that's what the play was about. And one of the ways that I got pushback from some folks was people were like, using the word virginity, what would your elders think? And we're like, really? I don't think my elders are gonna come see this play. But I think too often, marginalized folks, but especially Asian women, we have to deal with a lot of this BS, right? And so FOC really wants to cultivate a space where we can just tell our truths uncompromised.
Aloha, o Kiki Ko'ui Noa no Wai'anae Moku o Oahu, Hawaii mai au. I am Kiki. I'm from the island of Oahu, Hawaii. I come to you, my family, my ohana is from the Philippines and Samoa, but we're also settled in Hawaii and make Hawaii a home for 4 generations only. I come to you as a storyteller for the organization called Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, otherwise known as EPIC, where our mission is to advance social justice through culturally centered advocacy, research, and leadership development with a vision of liberation for all. Very strong goals. I am also a playwright and my focus, my personal mission was to tell the story of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders in the diaspora because it was, it's not a story that we hear often. And so it is very much in alignment with my work at EPIC because that is my job now. So I'm very blessed and blessed to be here. Mahalo.
Great. Thank you. Well, why don't we stay with you, Kiki, because we spoke last week, and, the next area is around narratives, like, what narratives feed you personally, right? So, and I remember when we had our orientation, you talked about how initially you were really, as a child, really into musical theater, right? So can you talk a little bit about like what stories move you and what feed you?
Yeah, well, maybe not so much musical theater, but there's a divide between musical theater and regular theater. Yeah.
My apologies.
But I do love musical theater. The stories that move me are stories that we don't hear often, the stories from the margins, queer stories. I for myself became a playwright because I needed to relate to a story that I told on stage. And I wasn't seeing myself on stage as an actor for many years. And so I went back to school to become a director, but noticed that there weren't any Pacific Islander stories that I could direct.
Yeah, but quickly separate back, you were drawn to theater when you were quite young, right?
Yes, I was. And that's because it was my form of escape. Just to escape my reality through stories, through reading, through writing, through TV, or through daydreaming. That was my world. And then, just to be a theater artist and be immersed in the world completely changed me as a person. And I also realized the incredible power that storytelling has from the stage, right? Like the power to influence an audience, to influence an audience's emotions and even the way they think, just from being right here, focusing on every breath, every movement, and that's why I'm here.
But then now, you talk about how now you're teaching art and storytelling, right? And then you're really trying to channel those who you work with to tell their stories, right? So, yeah, and so how do you do that now? Like I think you mentioned how you used to use the narratives were about escaping, but now it's unlocking our perspective, right?
Yeah, it unlocks a lot of different perspectives. Now I get to use my craft to organize community to tell their own stories. I don't get to write plays as much because a lot of my focus is in capacity building so that we can have more Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander artists tell their own stories and be empowered to tell their own stories. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, we're going to hear in today's short conversation, and I believe why this particular piano is curated is what people do in terms of behind the scenes, really building community and structures and the multi-hyphenate in regards to what one cares about and who one cares about, right? So thanks for that. But so if you could talk about, I mean, you are a performer, a writer, a playwright, a comedian, community, right? What got you started? I'm curious. Like, what really, what's your,
Yeah, what's my origin story?
yeah,
My origin story is that as I mentioned before, I'm first generation Hmong American refugee. In the 90s, my parents had a fear that I and my brothers were going to become gang members, which is, people look at me and they're like, really? But let me tell you, if I lived in California, I would have probably been a gang member. But we moved to Minnesota. So anyway, moved to Minnesota nice. So my parents didn't want us going outside. And this is really real. In the 90s, gangs formed because young Southeast Asian folks needed to find safety, community, sometimes money. And so we were stuck in the house, and with nothing to do, I read a lot of books, played a lot of video games, and I watched a lot of TV. And this completely changed the trajectory of who I think I became, because then I wanted to become a storyteller. I think in terms of, I started writing one of my stories, Confessions of a Lazy Hmong Woman, and I'm the lazy Hmong woman. It was supposed to be a book, got too lazy, didn't finish it, turned it into a play. But
Because that's so much easier.
it kind of was, because I had a director and designers to help me flesh things out a little bit. So it was basically the outline of what the book, it's only 20% of what the book wants to be. But I think I started writing that story because so many people, including other Hmong women who are feminists, who are highly educated, they kept saying to me, how is it possible that you could be a Hmong girl of your generation, growing up in the 90s, and you could still be lazy? And I thought, am I really that weird? Okay, let me tell my story. And this is because the kinds of narratives that were being told about Hmong girls around that time, and even today, if you ever heard us in the news at all, you saw Hmong girls as people who were oppressed by the Hmong culture, quiet, submissive types, somebody who had fought hard and had beaten the odds because they went to college and made it big and married a white man or something, right? And so I was like, let me write my story. And so I did. I wrote this piece, and I think that so I started this journey just to tell my own truth, and found out it wasn't just my truth; it was other people's truth, and other people pushed back against it. Perfectly great. But I think my trajectory as an artist evolved because somebody said to me, I love this play, but I would love to be my mom, but it's 95% in English. Would you ever consider doing a Hmong version? And I thought, yeah, sure, let's see. And thanks to the great state of Minnesota, who offers funding, I was able to find money to reimagine that play in the Hmong language. So I worked with a translator. I couldn't figure out, I ended up directing. I don't direct, I directed it because I needed somebody who knew theater, who knew Hmong people, and who could possibly learn how to direct. And I didn't know anybody at that time. Because it was, because I wanted to make it accessible to my community, I made sure we targeted folks who had never gone to theater, people who were new refugees, who were low income. We offered free or reduced tickets. We offered childcare, like you didn't have to call us to just show up. That is the only play that I've ever done where I've seen like 3 generations in one family show up. Like people dropped off a baby upstairs, mom and dad, like grandma, mom, maybe, okay, and then grandkid would go see the show. And I think I've never had the luxury to just be an artist because I felt like I also had to cultivate audiences for me, because even when I had a show that was produced by Hmong Company and no one showed up, like only 2 people showed up, we had to cancel the show. And they pushed back and told me, Hmong people don't come see theater. A Hmong company was saying this to me. White companies were saying this to me. And I was so angry that I was like, next time I'm just gonna produce my own show. And I did, and people came. And I feel so fortunate that this thing that felt like a burden of having to create your own community has actually become like an amazing life skill to have.
That's
I'll
right.
stop from there.
Well, and a superpower, right? So-
Yeah, thank you.
So I came to the States in 1972 with my family when I was 5 and a half. And we went first to the Hudson River Valley, a small city town called Ellenville, New York. And I learned to speak English in a 2-room schoolhouse with Latino farm worker kids and white rural kids, and like me, and me. And as soon as I could read English comfortably, I was completely addicted to books. And so I was 5 and a half when we came. The first things that I can really remember reading was the TV Guide when I was 7, because it was something that came to our house regularly. It would arrive every Thursday or Friday, and on Saturday mornings, my sister and my parents and I slept in a 1-bedroom, so I'd leave the bed I shared with my sister and go sit on the couch and read the TV Guide. And then TV and books were really how I tried to navigate immigration and race. I grew up in pretty white factory towns and suburbs. And I'm going to end this little section with a story that I think speaks to why I do this work. When I was in 7th grade, we had just moved from New York, from Long Island to Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So I was starting a new junior high. And when I went in, they gave me an IQ test to determine my placement. IQ tests are racist. Just feel like I need to say that. They come out of eugenics. And however, I happened to ace the IQ test. I'm good at taking tests. And also I read like crazy, right? I had been reading like mad. So the next day after I took the test, the guidance counselor called me into her office, told me my score, which I really wish I did not have that number in my head, and then told me, without having talked to my parents, that they wanted to skip me a grade, and then said she was like the sweetest woman, really kind, Italian-American, single, middle-aged, suburban lady. She was so sweet. But she said to me, you Asian kids do so well in school. I mean, there were only like 3 of us, right? It's not like there were so many Asian kids to judge by. You do so well in school, you do so much better than all the other kids. Why is that? She asked me why. And I said, because I knew the narrative. I said, in our culture, we really, really value education. As though there is some culture in the world that does not value education, and we were so special. I knew to say that because that's what we were supposed to say, being, post-65, early professional Asian immigrants after 80, 90 years of being banned. That, to me, means that my guidance counselor and I were narrating a story. We were narrating, so we're all narrating all the time. And I want us to be deliberate and prepared and choiceful about self-determining about what we're narrating.
That was beautiful. I do have a story about school as well, and how we have been educated under a lot of not sort of, but racist constructs. I went to a fundamental independent Baptist school for 14 years, K4 through 12. And I remember always wanting to get to the part about anything from the Philippines or about the Philippines. And it described the Philippine-American War as an insurrection by the natives. And I knew differently because every summer we would go home to the Philippines, and I had, my aunt was a teacher, so she would take me to National Bookstore and buy me books about Philippine history. So as a little child, I knew, first through high school even, I knew that the way the Philippines was being portrayed, our colonial history, the reason why America, the reason why Spain was there was just all wrong. And it wasn't a it wasn't an insurrection. It was the Philippine-American War. My ancestors were fighting for their freedom. So the power of how those words go through history has really always had such a driving force in how I think about policy or how I think about the little edits that we make from the day to day. And so the stories that really move me, not just those, but the stories that you know that society is going to get wrong about us. And that has been such a central part of AAJ's work over the last 3.5 years. I remember in February of 2020, early February 2020, our Asia chapter pinged us on Slack, because who is not on Slack unless they completely refuse to be, but our Asia chapter pinged us on Slack and said, this virus is coming. It's going to make its way to America, and you all need to be prepared. Simple as that. And be prepared how, right? And we knew immediately, the board and I talked about it, and we said, you know what, there hasn't been bad coverage yet, but the bad coverage is coming. We are going to get scapegoated. We are going to get blamed. They're going to use imagery that has nothing to do with the story. And we put out a statement way ahead of time, knowing that newsrooms, photo editors needed that guidance in order to report on COVID-19 accurately. That continued into the next year when the Atlanta shootings happened. My board and I were texting that night, and we knew that we needed to get ahead of this as well, and we needed to support the journalists on the ground and who would be coming from all over to cover this. So we put out a guidance that, to many in the room, it's really just stating the obvious, right? Center our community experiences, get the names and the terminologies wrong, be accurate and concise when you're reporting on anti-Asian hate incidents, and really also give credit to the community media who have better access than you, because they have been embedded in the community and are part of the community. And we put out that guidance, and we knew that wouldn't be the last thing, because we knew there were reporters, our AAJA chapter on the ground in Atlanta, and network reporters and other people covering that, who were reporting back to us and saying, I'm not being allowed to cover this because they're questioning whether or not I'm biased.
Yeah.
And so we put out another guidance, and we actually navigated some of these newsrooms, helped our reporters navigate these newsrooms conversations. So the stories, to me, what moves me is really like how we can get it right before it gets written. Because again, journalism is the first draft of history, and we are also the fourth estate in terms of how our government here functions. And really empowering the journalists, both in hard skills, but also in navigating these newsrooms and arenas where they feel powerless, but there is definitely a desire to get the stories right on behalf of the communities they come from.
So, but thanks for sharing that. But if we could stay with that in regards to particularly in the field of journalism for Asian Americans, there's been a real coming of age, right? I mean, where would we all be without that foundation of journalism and a community seeing itself differently, right? So, but what was, I mean, you talked a little bit about AAJ and how you all as an organization and the leadership had to pivot, but what were the conversations you were having with the journalists themselves and their personal narratives? Like how was that shifting in regards to what AAJ was doing with journalists who were going through, trying to figure out as professionals, but people going through this targeted at times, right?
Absolutely. I think there definitely is, in terms of the confidence and knowing that AAJA members, we are more than the sum of our parts. There is very much a growing confidence in being able to be the best journalists they can be while owning all their identities, especially including their AAPI identity. There is a grappling industry-wide of this question of objectivity. What really is objectivity? And journalists journalists of color, including our own, are actively questioning that with their newsrooms. And some newsrooms have been really great. I mean, in terms of empowering their journalists to assert their identity on the air or in their writing. A lot of specials did come out in 2020 and 2021. And as far as of late, 2022, Michelle Lee of Very Asian Foundation, that whole movement came out of her being allowed to use her platform on air to respond to the racist caller, right? So it's really exciting to hear and be able to engage with journalists who just want to be able to have tools, both soft and hard skills, to have hard conversations in their newsrooms about this.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, why don't we pivot a little bit to like the work that everybody else is doing? I mean, you two here, Kiki and May are creatives, right? But I think you both are really similar in regards to how you lead, creating such unique creative experiences, right? I mean, community is really where you both start. And then the storytelling and the community built, that all sort of merge. But if both of you could talk about, like, how do you create narratives in community? Like what kind of drives you personally when we bring that question up to you? I mean, I think maybe if you could talk first, Kiki, about like what you're doing at Epic, some of the projects specifically you work on.
I think in order to have narrative change, we have to have narrative sovereignty and have to let the community speak for themselves and give them, just empower them to tell their own story. So Auntie Fran Lujan, who's the director of the Pacific Island Ethnic Art Museum in Long Beach, always says to give yourself permission. And so I think we need to give ourselves permission to tell our own stories. And that has shown up in how I work now and how I work with community is I want to give them permission to tell their own stories. And so we have a project called Constellations that archives people's stories because, ever since we've learned in this pandemic that people pass and our elders are our story keepers and those stories will disappear. And a lot of those stories have already disappeared. And so what are ways that we can tell our stories? And that's just by having story circles, by writing our stories, by interviewing people, our elders. So that's how my work as a theater artist has changed.
And then you have such a foundation of respect, right? I mean, you believe you're part of a continuum, right? But it's like you both in terms of what I've read about when we spoke about with your own play, you felt you were so embraced, right? You've had a lot of elders and mentors, and it's really clear that you pay that forward, right? That's really important to you, right?
Thank you. Yeah. So my playwright mentor, Victor Roger, is the person that told me, Kiki, if you have the opportunity to tell your story, I'll help you write this play and produce it for you. What you have to do is pay it forward. Another mentor of mine, Dr. Fata Simanu Klutz, always told me, stories are going to change the world. So, and then Dr. Haile Opua Baker, who is an amazing playwright and theater artist who has started the Hawaiian Hanakiaka, so a Hawaiian form of theater at UH Manoa, is always very, I think she's guided my theater practice in community and in indigenous storytelling, and making sure that we always are grounded in our ancestors' stories too. So yeah, I just wanted to bring those names into the space because they have guided my practice to this day.
May, if you could talk about, like, yeah, I am curious how you would springboard off of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel, I think it's so important to really constantly challenge ideas of what is the Asian American story, because we know we're not monolithic, but the rest of this country doesn't necessarily think that. Often, I've been to like, the first time I went to the National Asian American Theater Conference, I think I was the first Hmong person that many of them had met. So I mean, some people never even heard of Hmong before, right? So I feel like it's so important to tell all of our stories because we all have different stories. And I think even thinking about my background as a Hmong person, we come from an orally-based culture. So that means that people of my parents' generation and older, many of them never got to go to school. So when your culture isn't really, you don't have a written language that is widely used by people, it makes it very easy to steal your culture. And so, what I grew up with in the 80s and 90s was a lot of other people appropriating our stories. And so it was really, the stakes for me were really high to be able to have agency to tell my own story in my own words, right? So I started off theater telling my own story. And then, I got to a point where there were other people who had stories they wanted to tell. And so rather than, again, using the model where I go, interview them, write something, before this, Don and I were talking about this theater Hmong Elders project I had created in 2014. And I noticed a lot of older people in my community were dying. And so inspired by my dad, look at me, I'm always writing grants, got a grant, started this program to capture their stories. A month after, found out I got the grant, that my dad passed away. And then the day after we buried him, literally, I started the program with these elders. I spent 8-9 months. Theater is not part of the Hmong community. So we had to learn about what language do we even use to talk about this? What is an actor? What is a director? What is a play? What is a scene? Also navigating so many different things. And ultimately, it led to them performing their own show. And I remember one of the questions people kept asking me was, who's performing? What actors? I'm like, the elders are performing. And it was so mind-blowing for folks that elders who had no experience acting were going to perform. But I felt like just as I had been given a platform to tell my story, elders and young people that I worked with need that. And I think even within FOC, Funny Asian Women Collective, right? If you ask me, who are the funny Asian women in Minnesota, where I'm like, me, Samukta, and Samukta, Dongfusai Vangsai, and Naomi Ko. And it's a joke, but also a truth, because I think that, it's easy to talk about being a writer, being a storyteller, but when you talk about comedy, people think comedy is not as important. But let me tell you, during the pandemic, we got gigs. You know why? Because people recognized that life was hard and they needed laughter, they needed escape, but they needed people to also do truth-telling in a way that was accessible, And so I think that the pandemic, ironically, was a space where people realized the power of comedy. We always knew comedy was powerful for entertainment, for healing, for it to be subversive, to critique things. But I think it really was like that. And I think one of the things that FOC does, knowing that we have a young community of people who have comedy and stories to tell, but who don't have the skills to do it, one of the things we always do is we nurture, mentor, and give people space to try things out. In fact, when I fly home tomorrow, like Friday night, we have a show called The Monk Show. It's close to being sold out. But there are two people who are going to be taking the stage for the very first time, and I know they would never go to a, like the Acme Comedy Club, but they're coming, and the fact that, I'm not just bragging by saying, oh, they're coming out. What I'm saying is that our community members, like, I feel like one of the other narratives is that, will people pay for this? Will people go to Asian American plays? Will people go to an all Asian women comedy show? The answer is yes, they do. And so I think it's so important to name that, is that even if no one else comes from within our community, people are hungry for this, they'll pay equitably to come. They'll support the arts.
Yeah, and I think you're going to help redefine. I mean, Minneapolis, St. Paul has such a robust history of community building, Asian American. The history there is exceptional, but also the ways in which a very Midwest way of how people work together and support one another, right? So I think in many ways there's sort of a new kind of community theater that it's really helping to reshape, right? So, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, Rinku, I'm curious, hearing all you've heard, right, in regards to somebody who's committed really their career to what everybody's coining narrative change, or like, where's your head nowadays in regards to this like continuum of narratives, both in the context of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, but also you're always encouraging narratives within communities, but then who they speak to.
Yeah. So just a tiny bit of definitional things. I'll try not to be boring. So we define narrative as the ideas and themes, values that are embedded in collections of stories. So the stories are important, but the themes are what makes a narrative. And one story would never be enough. You have to have repetition and saturation of a society. And when that has happened with an idea or a characterization, say, for more than 50 years, that's our marker, we call that deep narrative. And when something has been pushed through media, through conversation, through education, through journalism for 50 years, it becomes really sticky and hard to dislodge. So the thing I'm obsessed with right now is how sticky the model minority imagery is about us, how much we believe it about ourselves, how much we benefit from it, with exceptions, and also how it harms us and other communities of color. So I'm very interested in stories about Asian Americans and multiracial communities. So I don't know if you all have seen the work around Bengali Harlem. So Vivek Bald, a historian, has unearthed this history of Bengalis, my people, mostly Muslims, jumping merchant ships in the 1900s.
Literally jumping ship.
Yep, landing in New York, deciding to abandon ship, and becoming organizers, socialist, labor, and peace organizers, integrating into Black Harlem. So there's like a whole subculture in Harlem, which is a Black culture of Bengalis who just went there, got married, made community, and started organizing.
A community of the past that feels like of the future, too.
Yeah,
right?
and actually, there's a new documentary that is the grandchild of one of those immigrants talking about how it was to grow up Bengali and Black. Filipino and Mexican farm workers organizing in the 20th century. There's a group now called Suru for Solidarity, who are Japanese Americans, ethnically Japanese Americans, racially diverse. And they are doing work on reparations because they have a direct experience, and they're also deeply aware of the communities that didn't get theirs. And they do organizing. They have a study group. Like, they're building a narrative around Japanese Americans and reparations that have to do with other communities, Indigenous, Black communities. So that's a lot of what I'm interested in. We have some very practical things we do, programs we do. We have a ghostwriting service for grassroots groups that, racial justice and immigrant rights organizations are in. Because rich people have ghostwriters, and that's how they get their stuff out, and they saturate. So we have a freelance team, we have editors, we talk to groups about their strategy. They do it for a while, for a year. We're in this relationship where we're monthly producing op-eds, letters to the editors, speeches. Used to do Twitter threads. Now there are a lot of Instagram essays, like photo essays. We have an author support program. We just graduated 19 authors, 18 books. Where they got a year of coaching, editing, business advice, and writing community, because their stories we're trying to make a pipeline for the stories of people who actually make change. We have a lot of problem books in our country and in our world. We have, and I appreciate all journalists and scholars so much. But their job is often to elucidate the problem, not the solution. It's the organizer, activist, advocate, policymaker's job to figure out the solution, and then we also have to learn how to narrate to that solution, to those solutions. Because if you have too much problem narration, it actually depresses action. All the awareness that we're raising of violence against Asian Americans, of poverty among Asian Americans, of the relationships of Pacific Island, like people who came into the identity through war and conquest, not through immigration. It's so important for us to know, but if we want people to take action, we have to balance all of that awareness raising, all of those stories with stories of people doing the thing we want them to do. We want readers and viewers and audiences to do, which is act in community, daily civics in community. That's democracy. And having that happen by all of the people is multiracial democracy. So those are my current obsessions.
That's incredible. I think we have, maybe if we can wrap up our area and then open it up, because am I right? We're finishing at 10:40, I think, right? So, but that was really great, Rinku. What would be great to close with, and I think that question of model minority for Asian Americans is a fundamental question of not having a narrative, and often creates divides in our community. The debates around in the context, I think, for all of our communities is what represents a good person of color and what doesn't, and we often are infighting because of that, and we can't advance other narratives accordingly, right? And I think how you articulate that is starting to, people are really trying to think. I mean, if you look at all these controversies around David Cho and this beef show, and how the community is not responding particularly well to it, but also if you look in the context of Everything Everywhere All at Once, incredible, but there's this question of immigrant male rage that I think is the juxtaposition of, we've seen multiple mass shootings, right? So, yeah.
I actually also have an area of obsession. Just to jump off of Rinku-san's chat about that. So area of obsession for me is really, for all the work and the organizing that we do as communities, the solidarity work that we do, the 50-year stickiness, I'm going to use that from now on, the saturation. There are institutions that either enable and empower and equip us to be able to make this kind of change, or are hindering us from making that change. And it's movie studios, it's publishing houses, it's talent agencies, it's managers, and newsrooms and media companies. And one of AJ's strategic priorities is to get deeper into policy and advocacy, because there is no accountability mechanism for media to report on diversity numbers. Because at the heart of it, better newsrooms are diverse newsrooms, which are inclusive of our stories. So we've embarked on a bunch of pilot programs that really go around this lack of accountability mechanism and try to bring to light the lack of diversity in newsrooms. And what we did last year, we did a broadcast snapshot project of on-air talent, because on-air talent is the most publicly available, and we did not need newsrooms to respond to a survey, which they're notorious for not responding to diversity surveys. And we found that out of the top 20 markets, nearly 74% of local newsrooms are not representative in numbers of the AAPI populations in those top 20 markets. So AJ has that slice of the newsroom, but I think it's incumbent upon us, especially with a lot of new institutions, a lot of new attention, that we take a look at every slice of the industries that could enable us, green light projects, get the book deals, hire more editorial and C-suite positions, that we take a look at how we're holding them accountable for our communities. So I think this is part and parcel of narrative change, that policy, accountability, and diversity numbers are only a piece of it, right? Once we get to the numbers, it really is about a hard look at the framing, at the historical context that we're able to put around our stories. So just to put that out there, as we talk about the art that's meaningful, that becomes meaningful to everyone, there is a foundational layer of accountability that we need to hold institutions of power to. Yeah.
That's great. What I think we see within the context of the four here, just how there's a vision everybody seeks, and you have to really walk the world in a way that where you're trying to actively, constantly create change, right? So, well, thank you. Why don't we open it up for, questions? There's two microphones, so it's kind of hard to do, yeah. So why don't we start on this side and maybe pass forward? If you could keep your questions quick so we could try to hear as many perspectives as we can, that would be great.
Hey, I'm Kamal Calcium, White House AA NHPI commissioner. My nickname is also Rinku. I've never met another Rinku, but I go by Kamal.
Awesome.
So thank you for doing this amazing panel. In our history, really all over the world, how we've dealt with storytelling for minority communities has always been very problematic. We've seen it in terms of what happened to minorities in India even before partition, and then we saw it with our stories as we came here in the States. We saw it with regards to what happened to the Sikh community after 9/11. So it's always a tragedy, right? And it's problematic because when we all try to tell these stories, I don't want to come off as a victim, right? It's just, I think there's a way to tell these stories and empower the community rather than painting us all as victims. I don't want to be a victim. Most people don't want to be victims. So how do you do that?
Go.
You go and then I'll go.
That's something as we developed guidance too, and we actually, in partnership with the South Asian Journalists Association, we did put out guidance on the anniversary of 9/11, knowing that even how many years later, we could still make an impact. I think it's on the media side, it's being able to celebrate our stories, right? It's not just the 6 o'clock news where you do a rundown of crimes, where you do a rundown of everything that's gone wrong during the day, but it really is enabling journalists to uplift their stories. There is a conversation I have with members all the time, and it goes like this: "Oh, I really loved your story about X." And they said, "Oh, thank you. It took me so much to fight for that." And that's the kind of advocacy that AAJ wants to help support, to support that member. If it was a feature on Viet Thanh Nguyen and his new book, if it's a feature on celebrating API women during Heritage Month, which MSNBC did with their Culture Is series, how do we support both the tragedy as well as the celebrations? I know it's a little generic, but it's sort of the same fight, right? Like, oh, I fought so hard to get that story in, and there are these little battles that we don't know about, and how do we empower that and basically give them the backup they need organizationally to fight those battles internally?
So I think that the way that people struggle gets really flattened out in most storytelling about that struggle.
Yeah.
And part of it is the proportionality, like how much in our, let's say you have 5 minutes to speak on a panel. How much of that 5 minutes are you going to spend on establishing the problem for X person that you might be talking about? And how much are you going to spend it describing the things that they did, the steps that they took? So I think part of the agency is like, as the storyteller, if you're an advocate, you're trying to learn the person's story, or you're a journalist, or you're a novelist or a playwright and trying to translate the story, you want to be asking questions that are not about that person's victimhood, like about the things they tried to do to change their situation, whether or not those things succeeded. Like, it's more that the reader or viewer needs to see somebody trying, and usually when we try collectively, we lose a lot, but we also win things. So the principle to remember is, if you want your reader to do something like adopt a new attitude or take a certain action, then you have to show them in your stories somebody doing that thing. And that automatically takes you out of the victim space into the agent space.
Do we have another question? Right over here.
I think he had it first.
Oh, sorry. Okay. And then we'll go next.
Hi, my name is Matthew Sada. I'm a Foreign Service Officer currently in Los Angeles at the University of Southern California teaching public diplomacy. I had a question just kind of in your experience as you talk about narratives. You're obviously in a creative space, but to what extent you interact with the federal government, specifically the State Department, in order to try to weave some of these narratives into, let's call it mainstream discourse, or also into our foreign policy, into how we're representing the country overseas. And I'll just give two plugs. A project that I worked on was the USA Pavilion at the World's Fair in Dubai, Expo 2020, celebrating our country. The next one's going to be actually in Japan, in Osaka in 2025. And hopefully, if we're successful, we may actually bring the World's Fair back to Minnesota in 2027. So here are two platforms maybe that would be good to incorporate some of our maybe Asian American narratives, both in Japan or hopefully maybe back here in Minnesota. But just very curious to see any interaction that you guys have had with the State Department, either here at home or overseas. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I mean, this is, I guess, not on a federal level, but on a state level. Actually, Funny Asian Women Collective is, we're working with our legislators to try to get bonding money. We're trying to get a couple $1 million from our state to build an Asian American center for media and the arts. That's what we're calling it. And this is real. People are probably like, oh, 3 comedians. How come you guys think you can get a couple million? I don't know, but I've been testifying. So, but I think we've gotten a lot of support because here's the thing. It's crazy because Minnesota has a huge, actually, I think the third largest Southeast Asian population. We actually have a lot of Asian people in Minnesota, right? Even Theater Mu is the second largest Asian American theater company in the United States. But guess what? None of us have a building. None of us have a home. And I think changing their narrative is about having a space so we're not constantly renting from someone else's place. We're not constantly guests. And so for us, getting the government to literally have a buy-in into this space is, I think, one of the things that we're working on at the moment.
We work with one group that has State Department funding, but haven't done much else with the State Department specifically. We do work with local government quite a lot. Mostly administrators, actually, so less elected officials and more staff who run things in cities and towns. And yeah, I think, around violence, for example, they've definitely been navigating what they want to say that's not going to make things worse in those locales. So I'm happy to talk more about what you have in mind. We do some work in the exhibition kind of space as well, so we can talk offline or afterwards or something.
Yeah, I'm Lisa Kim. I'm a first-generation immigrant from Korea, and I actually had a question regarding your families. So I think a lot of the times our families kind of perpetuate some of the stereotypes that are given onto us, like, my parents would say, keep your head down, work hard, and just, keep going. But did you have to face those, I guess, trying to change the narratives within your own families? And if so, how did you go about doing that?
Great question. Try to answer that.
I
Try to
can
answer
always
that
talk.
quickly.
Okay, I'll talk, yeah. Just jump in, tell me if I'm talking too much. As an artist, one of the questions I always get in Asian American spaces is, what did your parents think of this, right? They're always like, how'd you become an artist? So I'll tell you a story of when I was 18. I applied for, I was working at Taco Bell, made $140 a week. I saw this flyer that was looking for actors to be in a Hmong play, $200 a week. I'm like, let me go audition. And I was bad, but they wanted to nurture new young artists, right? Because everybody had grown up. They were like 25. They wanted to start families, get a real job. So I was 18. They hired me, trained me. And so I remember my mom kept saying, so I would, around May, Asian American Heritage Month, we would go tour at schools and perform this play. And my mom kept saying, what are you doing? Like, is this volunteer work? And I was like, actually, Mom, I'm getting paid like, I think I was getting paid like $75 a show. So it was like $75 an hour, which is a lot when you're 18. And so she was like, okay, that's fine. And I tell this story to people because, well, it's the truth. But also the other thing is, I think my parents and many other, Asian American parents are worried about their kids because they're just like, I'm worried about you. I want to make sure you're okay. I want to make sure you know how to make a living. And so I think it's not about whether you go into the arts or not. How can you approach the arts or whatever field you're in and be smart about it and make a living at it and don't starve? And so I just needed to show my parents a pathway into this world. And once that happened, they were, they're fine. They were, but also I'm not Korean. My parents are refugees. They had lower standards. They were just very glad. They were just very glad I went to college. Sorry, East Asians, y'all, I don't know.
I'll add something really quick here. I think I'm maybe the oldest person on this panel, and so my mom and I have had, almost 60 years together. And a few years ago, I said to her, "Ma, are you like the most politically engaged, not racist, progressive person in your friend circle?" And she's like, "Yeah, I am." And she, she like carries that proudly, intervenes a lot. And I said, and I don't remember if I asked her or she said it, but she said, "That's because of you and your sister." you know that's because of you and your sister. And yeah, you could just, it's not always apparent what's happening, but in an adult relationship, we have shaped each other. Yeah.
Well, and thinking that through, I'm sure so many families have had conversations we haven't had before, but what kind of narratives it unlocks when everybody's just much more open to exploring them together, right?
Yeah.
So did you?
Yes, actually, nothing having to do, fortunately, my parents, I actually was a journalism major, and 9/11 happened, and then I decided I wanted to go into policy. So major life shift, but my parents had no problem with me being in journalism, unlike a lot of members. They're like, so you're gonna be on CNN, right? And I'm like, not exactly, I wanna write. But they were, luckily, they were always fully supportive. But what's really interesting right now in many Filipino and Filipino-American households is, when you're talking about narrative change, is the history is being rewritten about martial law. And that is a conversation that I have tried to have in my household that has not gone the right way. I mean, I learned about martial law through aunts and uncles and parents and reading, and suddenly there's a shift. Books are disappearing. Books are being banned about martial law, and even the adults who taught me about martial law have changed their tone, and it's quite a phenomenon, and I think it has a personal effect on people who grew up learning about it and then have like their community work and their community formed out of that. And narrative change, creatives come into play because there is a Broadway show called Here Lies Love that documents the Marcoses and the People Power Revolution on Broadway. And I think there's been a question of whether or not that glamorizes the martial law era. But I say any creative outlet or agency to revisit history, whether or not it's 100% factually accurate, is really important. So we're very excited about Here Lies Love on Broadway, opening in July, during the same time as AAJ convention, but we're gonna find a way to support. But I think it just goes to show like how narratives change. In addition to sort of our personal journeys with our family, there are still forces at play that we need to take into account. And I'm still trying to figure out how to have that conversation about martial law. It did happen, it wasn't good. Just for the record.
I think we have to wrap up. Oh, we have 7 more minutes, so let's make the most of it, right? So who is next?
My name is Wei. On that telling the story, I come here as a new immigrant as an adult. So I was really appreciate Reniko's work about freelance writing, how people telling story in English as a second language. Particularly with John on the fly, I went to film school thinking, okay, script writing is too hard for me because my first language is Chinese. So the question is, how do you actually, in general, in such diverse Asian American community, you come from Hmong and South Asian or Philippines, to help people tell their individual stories in a more effective way? And the second is how the current AI, ChatGPT, you think impacting narrative. It's probably, that's it. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just say quickly on AI, the biggest danger is fake news moving around about our communities. So just waiting for, I don't know, a video to emerge of Ali Wong saying things she never said, or, Vanita Gupta, who's in the, who is an associate U.S. attorney. So that is very scary. Most news organizations are totally unprepared to deal with it. And we probably will need some grassroots kinds of vehicles in place to fight off their effect.
I mean, I think it's a really exciting time where, all of our communities want to tell stories, right? So I think for CAM, what we're trying to wrap our heads around is how do you encourage that every member of the community should be a storyteller now, right? So, and I think the first question was very powerful. How do we, the pandemic's been interesting. I mean, I think for the first time as a person of color, when some of the attacks were happening, people were starting to ask me, well, how are you doing, right? And that was a very disorienting position to be in. And I think navigating the space where you're not being opportunistic about what's happened in the community is complicated. But I think what was really striking to me was when it's hard to express, but when communities were being attacked, it didn't matter what country of origin you were from, everybody felt that, right? So there was something there that I think the victimization and the pain should only be the starting point for a conversation, right? But it shouldn't be the conversation. But there's something kind of swirling that everybody's wanting to have these conversations. So I think and I think younger generations are going to demand much more sophisticated, nuanced, complicated stories. So I think just momentum's going to push us in a certain way. But I think all of our responsibility is to try to really structure to make it more potent, right? So
I think so many of, just based off of what you said, a lot of people have their stories and they want to tell it. Yeah. And I think that's the importance of relationship building and really just showing up, just being there physically for your community so that they can tell their stories. Because if we're here, we have no choice but to tell our stories. It'll just happen naturally, I think.
maybe one more question. Is there?
Thank you. I'm not only speaking for me, I'm a teacher from DC International School, and right here I have 4 of my students here with me, and we have like 10 students who come to the conference with me today. So thank you for the opportunity. So I want to ask a question because I'm a teacher and a mother of 2 students who go to a school where the majority are not Asian kids, and I'm also working at a school where the majority are not Asian kids. So I'm speaking on the level of being a mother and also being an educator. So for me, narrative change as a grassroots member is like a daily fight. It's like every day, and for my students and my children, they're the same things. Like every day we fight for narrative change. We want people to change how they view us as individuals. So I want to ask you a question because all of you are so successful and you did amazing things. But as grassroots, how you see us collaborate on like a more bigger scale? Because I'm not sure I'm not only Asian mom who is fighting this, not only Asian teacher who is fighting this, and they are not the only Asian children who are fighting that in the school. So how do you see on a bigger level, like individuals like us can be connected as a group and also somehow use a resource from the people who are so successful already? So kids and mother and educators like myself can be more empowered. Thank you.
Big question.
I'll go really fast. I'll try to be fast. Okay. I teach different places, but currently at the University of Minnesota as well. And so I guess I can't talk about on a large level, but I think as an educator, one of the ways that I try to impact change is I think about the kind of stories that we read in classes. I try to make sure it's diverse. You know, it could be that simple. Even if you don't talk about race, the fact that they're reading a play, a poem by a Black author, a story by an Asian American woman, I think that is useful. I think that's, again, just opening people's eyes, right? And it's not, you're not showing these stories during Asian American Heritage Month. This is just part of the curriculum, day 1, day 2, whatever. But I think the other thing is, and it depends on how comfortable you are. I'm completely comfortable bringing my whole self to the space, and so I tell people about how I navigated college as a first gen, and I tell people this so that they can maybe learn the system themselves. If I have, for example, if I have white students who are like, can I get an extension? I'll say yes, and I'll tell the whole class, because I know some of the kids of color need to hear it. You can also get an extension. You can talk to me about this. Or, I'm totally comfortable talking about, if we're reading a story that is about racism, I'm completely comfortable talking about my experience with racism. And one of the things I've heard is actually a lot of the white students I don't know what their experience, I don't know what they were thinking of me before, but after I tell that story, they feel closer. I'm more human to them. So when they think about racist things, they're not just thinking about it in a general way, but they're like, that shit happened to my instructor. I can't believe that. And they get very angry on my behalf. And so I feel like if you are comfortable, because everybody has boundaries, you can bring some of that to the space. And if you're in a space where it's very toxic, then you could do, you know, share other people's work and use that as a way to enter into this conversation.
My advice is to try to do more things with other people. So there are other people like you right where you live. And there may even be other parents or teachers or people in your current school community who have an interest in Asian American history or in just having an inclusive culture right now. I'm going to encourage people to sign up for our newsletter at narrativeinitiative.org because we do publish stories of grassroots narrative action and resources from different places. And the last thing I want to say is that when culture and narrative is also produced by institutions, all of our institutions and the institutions in your communities. My proudest narrative moment probably was getting the Associated Press to take illegal immigrant out of their style guide, to take those two words out of their style guide, something we worked with Jose Antonio Vargas on. And you could also look around locally for bad coverage that you can then, just get 3 people together, go talk to the editorial board or the editor of your local paper about how they're covering your community, for example. So you could think a little bit more institutionally about things that could change locally, and then just get with a couple other people and go try making the demand, see what happens.
That's great. Great. Okay. I wish the conversation could continue on, and it's so it really, I think, really for me, really feeds me and inspires me. I want to thank the panel for today. Thank you all for coming out, and let's just keep these conversations going together.